Bracelets are the spotlight accessory today. Author and instructor Melissa Grakowsky Shippee is here with me today to show us a great bracelet. Thanks for coming in, Melissa.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is a beautiful piece that you made.
Thank you.
You're welcome. This turquoise one, you know, you could do the herringbone in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely.
But you're using it with tila beads too.
Yes, these little components are made with tila beads and then you stitch them onto your tubular herringbone base.
Beautiful. Okay, well, how do we get started?
Okay, so to start, you're going to start by making the components that you need, and then you'll do the wristband that you need for the bracelet. So you're going to start by picking up 4 repeats of 1 15-0, 2 11-0s, and 1 half-tila bead.
Okay.
And, sorry, 1 15-0, 2 11-0s, 1 15-0, and 1 half-tila bead. You're going to bring them down toward the end of your thread, and then you're going to stitch through the first few beads again to form a loop. So what this does is it creates you the initial ring for your bezel, and it's actually the inside row kind of holds the stone in place. And what you want to do is you want to stitch around a few times. You want this ring to really be held in place by the thread before you move on to the next row. So once you go around a few times, you'll have something like this. And at this point, I usually don't knot when I'm working with beads and thread, but you want to make a knot by stitching underneath some of the thread that's already there and then stitching through the loop that you form.
All right.
Then you're going to reverse direction and stitch through the other hole of the half-tila.
So it really provides some architecture too for your
It does.
piece.
I mean, you really want to make sure that this ring is in place, it's held in place tightly before you move on to the next row. So this is sort of the base for everything.
Okay.
And for the next row, what you're going to do is pick up 1 cylinder bead A. I just happen to use 2 colors, so that's the first color. 1 4mm pearl.
And you know, a lot of people are going to take quite a few hours to work on something like this, but if once you're proficient, you could make this in an evening, a long evening maybe.
Absolutely. I mean, these little components work up really quickly, and if you wanted to, you could actually use fewer components on your bracelet so that you only have to make a few of them.
There you go, that's a good idea.
That cut down a little bit of the time. So I just stitched through the next half-tila. So I have this set of 3 beads between the second hole of each of these half-tilas. That's what the second row is going to look like. So once you finish that row, you'll have this. So this is the basic front of the bezel. Now to work the back side, you're going to flip this beadwork over. You're going to take one of your chatons and place it inside the bezel, face down.
Okay, so you're going to work around the back then?
Yeah, so next is to work around the back. And when you place this stone down, you want to make sure that the 4mm pearls overlap the edge of the stone just a little bit. They're going to be what holds the chaton in place.
Oh, that's a great tip.
Now the next row is going to be comprised of 3 11-0s. So I've picked up 3 11-0s. My thread's coming out of a pearl. I'm going to stitch through the very next pearl. And your stone might fall out of place like it just has. That's okay. It really doesn't have to go in there until the end of this row.
Right, because then it will be, you're basically seating it.
Yeah. So this row isn't going to be what actually holds the stone in place. Once you finish, the stone will be held in place.
Okay.
So after this row, there will actually be one more row of netting worked off of this row that I'm doing right now that will hold the stone in place, and that will give you this. So on the back side there's this netting. It holds the back of the stone in place, and you want to make sure as you're tightening up that last row there that the point on the back of your stone is centered in the middle of that last row, and that will ensure that on the front side the point of this pointed chaton is right in the center of your little window here. So the next step I'm going to show you is how to start the tubular herringbone stitch base.
Okay.
The wristband. So you're going to pick up 4 11-0s, bring them down toward the end of your thread, leave just enough of a tail to put your needle on later and weave into your beadwork. Then you're going to stitch through the first 2 11-ohs again to form a loop. And when you pull tight, the 2 pairs of beads sit side by side.
So this is beginning your herringbone
This
stitch.
is beginning the herringbone stitch. What I'm doing is I'm doing a row of ladder stitch. I'm laddering these beads together. Now I'm stitching through the second pair of beads again. This is going to form the base for the rest of the herringbone stitch.
Okay.
So I have to ladder the rest of the beads on here now. I'm going to pick up 2 11-ohs and I'm going to stitch down through the last pair of 11-ohs that I added, and then stitch up through the pair of 11-ohs that I just added. And I'll continue in this way until I have 6 pairs of 11-ohs and 6 pairs of cylinder beads after that.
All right, and your needle and thread too. Let's talk a little bit about that, the
Okay.
materials that we're using too.
Okay, so I like to use size 12 long beading needle, but there are different sizes of beading needles. Size 12 is a good size to use when you're working with size 11-oh seed beads and size 15-oh seed beads, because you can get easily through the size 15-oh seed beads. I like to use, you know, a thread that sort of matches the color of my beads, or something that's not going to stand out too much.
Sure, so you want it to be kind of be camouflaged in the design.
Right, you don't want to see too much of the thread. Well, I don't like to see too much of the thread in my beadwork. It's not really part of it. Okay, so once you do the initial row of herringbone here, the laddered row, this is what you have. And you need to join the last pair of beads to the first pair of beads so that you can form a tube. Because this wristband is really just a hollow tube. And when you wear it as a bracelet like this, it just gets flattened and it provides a little bit of dimension. So to join the last pair of beads to the first, you're going to just ladder that last pair to the first pair by stitching around in a circular fashion between the 2 pairs of beads. And once your thread is emerging from the first pair of beads that you started with, you're ready to start doing actual herringbone stitch.
So now you'll be building onto your ladder.
Yes, you're going to build the herringbone stitch onto this set of laddered beads.
Okay.
So to do that, you're going to pick up 2 11-ohs and stitch down through the very next bead. I'm only going to go through 1 of this pair of beads.
So you're anchoring it in place there to start.
Yeah, and they sort of sit right on top of the pair of beads that I stitched into and out of.
And they start facing each other too there.
Yeah, they get this sort of angle to them, which gives it the herringbone pattern. Then I'm going to stitch down through the 11-oh after that.
And I notice you're working with round seed beads, but you could also, the other side of this is done with cylinders, is that right?
Yes, so the reason why I used the round seed beads on one side and the cylinder beads on the other is because the size 11 cylinder beads are slightly smaller than the size 11 seed beads, and what that does is it allows the wristband to sort of gently curve.
Oh, and it makes it so comfortable too.
Yeah, because the inside is going to be shorter than the outside because of the small difference in size between the cylinder beads and the 11-oh seed beads. So you're going to continue working herringbone around this ring, and when you get to the end, as you're adding the last pair of cylinder beads, you're going to do a step up. What that means is you add the pair of cylinder beads by stitching down, and then you're going to stitch up through the top 2 11-ohs in this first, this is called a ladder, when you have the pairs of beads stacked on top of each other. You're going to stitch up through the top 2 to give you a step up. What this does is it keeps the threads going horizontal across between the rows of beads and puts your thread in place to work the next row.
Yeah, it's always kind of challenging to think about the thread path and where things need to be exiting and entering, and that makes a lot of sense.
Right, okay, so then you just stitch this, you keep going with this herringbone stitch and do your step up at the end of every row until your wristband is about 1/2 inch shorter than the length that you want it to be around your wrist. And you kind of want this bracelet to be snug on your wrist, so a good way to figure out what length you need is to actually measure around your wrist and then subtract about 1/2 inch. That 1/2 inch is going to be added when you add the clasp.
Okay.
Okay, so now to place the components on the wristband, You're going to start with the center component. I like to use an odd number of components, so there's one right in the center. So you're going to find the center. You can either do this by counting the rows or measuring the wristband, or you can just kind of eyeball it, which is what I do.
Me too.
Yeah, just look for the center, and you're going to place your component down there. And at this point, you want your thread to be coming out of one of the 11-0s that was in the first row on the back side. It's 11-0 right before a 4mm pearl on the back side. And I'm going to pick up a new 11-0, and then I'm going to find my center ladder of herringbone stitch, which I have 3 ladders on the front. I have 3 pairs of 11-0s on the front. Looking for that center pair. I'm going to figure out where to stitch based on where this component lies on the bracelet. So I'm going to stitch through the nearest row that I can see when I have my component in place, through the first bead in the center pair.
So it really does hide your thread while you're working.
Yeah, you're not going to really see the thread. Then I'm going to stitch back through the other bead in that same pair, the center pair, and then I'll pick up a new 11-0.
Perfect.
And on the back side, I'm going to look for the 11-0 right before the next pearl, and I'm going to stitch through that. I'm sort of going around in a circle. I'm stitching toward the first 11-0 that they started coming out of.
So every time, and we'll have all the instructions for this on our website too, so people can follow the pattern, but this really gives us a good sense of kind of the architecture of how things come together.
Right. And so once you get that first row stitched in place, or you get stitched to that first row of herringbone, you're going to count down 11 rows, counting that one you stitched into, and you're going to attach the other side to the 11th row, so that each of these components is going to span 11 rows of the wristband.
Okay.
Now, if you happen to be using slightly larger beads, like on this bracelet here, I used size 11 hex cut beads.
That looks really pretty too.
Thanks. They're actually a little bit bigger than the size 11 seed beads, so I had to span them between 9 rows. The components only took up 9 rows of space.
So you just make an adjustment based on how big the components are.
Right, and then whatever you do with the first one, just make sure you do that with the other components. And so once you have the first component on there, then you can attach the second component. You're going to start by attaching the second component to the row right next to the first one that you used to attach the first component. So there'll be 2 rows of space between the beads, so you have a little bit of spacing there.
Okay. So you just want to make sure that you keep it even too across the surface.
Yeah, you just want to, whatever spacing you do, initially you just want to make sure you continue to do that so you have an even spacing. I mean, you could play with the spacing and space them further apart if you wanted to, or if you wanted to do fewer components, have them spaced further apart. You know, there's options there.
Okay, and what about attaching the clasp?
Okay, so to attach the clasp, pretend this is a finished wristband. I have this little piece here. The first thing you want to do before you attach the clasp is you want to stitch together the beads in the last row. If you look, the ladders of the herringbone stitch have spaces between them. That's just the way herringbone stitch is. But what you want to do first is close up that space. So when you finish the end of the wristband, your thread should be coming out of an 11-0. You're going to stitch down through the adjacent 11-0 without adding any beads, and then you're going to stitch up through the 11-0 after that. Now I'm going to again stitch down through that second 11-0. So I've gone around in a circle, and what that means is I'm laddering those 2 11-0s together. It pulls the 2 ladders together and closes up that gap.
So that's going to make a more stable surface for attaching the clasp?
Yeah, and it'll just look a little less messy on the end of the bracelet. And because you start the wristband with a laddered base on the other end, you don't have to do this. You just have to do it on the side that you finished working.
The growing side.
The growing side, right. So you don't have to do it at the base because that's already done because of the way you started it.
Very good.
So just to do this here quickly, you want this to be all closed up before you actually add the clasp. So you're just laddering together the beads that are across the little gaps.
Okay.
Once you do this on both sides, you're going to bring your thread out of an 11-0, that's 1 bead away from the edge. So it doesn't matter which side you start on. From there, you're going to pick up 5 15-0s. You're going to stitch through one of the loops of your slide clasp. And I like to line up my slide clasp with my beadwork, so I make sure I'm stitching through the correct loop and in the correct direction. Because it's really easy to kind of get disoriented if you pick it up.
So you lay it right next to
I'm
each
laying
other
it right
so
next
that you
to
can
it.
get it on there the right way.
Yep, and I'm working from front to back on the wristband, so I'm stitching from front to back through the hole on my slide clasp.
Okay.
Then I'm going to turn this over, and I'm going to stitch through the cylinder bead that's 1 bead away from the edge. So it lines up, it's the cylinder bead that lines up with the 11-0 I started at on the front side. And I'm going to pull this tight, and the 15-0s should go right through the hole of the slide clasp.
Good. And then you do the same thing for the other loop.
Yeah, actually there's one more little step I want to show you. I do another pass through here. I just think it looks a little better if you add some extra beadwork. So you just stitch up through the adjacent cylinder bead, pick up 2 15-0s, stitch back through the middle 15-0 that's already there. And this tends to get a little loose, but I can tighten it up after. Pick up 2 new 15-0s and stitch through the 11-0 next to the one I started at. So it just adds a little extra stability. You get another pass of beads there, so it looks a little more substantial. And you'll do the same thing to the other loop.
So this bracelet, when you're finished, is a slightly, simpler version. You can get really intricate.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of different things you can do with herringbone stitch. It's very versatile. You can do a different number of ladders. You can use different size beads.
So even the necklace is a simpler version, the turquoise necklace with the...
Yeah, that's just a 2-ladder tubular herringbone, and you put different size beads just right into the ladders. So that one's really easy too.
It would work up really quickly, I imagine.
Absolutely.
The gold one, though, maybe that's an epic project.
Yeah,
there.
that one's a little more elaborate. You have components, just like you do with this small bracelet, and then you have the tubular herringbone wristband that lies flat.
Beautiful. And the one with the sparkle in the center there.
That's also, there's a few different tubular herringbone straps, and then you stitch them together with beads in between them.
That looks great. And I love the braided piece too.
That one's really easy too. It's just 2-ladder tubular herringbone stitched done in 3 different colors and then braided together.
All right, so that's to make it in an evening piece?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. And how about, let's talk a little bit about our necklace here, the gray.
So this necklace is a workshop project. It combines netting with herringbone stitch and a little bit of netting with peyote stitch and a little bit of herringbone stitch.
Let's talk also about the turquoise necklace with the lariat in the front.
Okay, so this one is a lot of tubular herringbone. You've got 2-ladder tubular herringbone in the wrists, the neckband, and you've got some herringbone stitch in each of the components as well.
Well, we just have a few more seconds, so let's take a look at this beautiful necklace with the bezels that has beads all the way around too. That is just gorgeous. This is beautiful work, Melissa.
Thank you.
You're welcome.